All right, we finally get to get into Hebrews. And I have to tell you, you'll have to put your thinking caps on because Hebrews is not what you think. It is, if you just read through it, generally, I don't know, anybody read it just recently? Okay, have you noticed that it doesn't sometimes make exact sense? Yeah, the reason is because the translation is not, the translations of the Greek are very difficult. And well, all right, I didn't do this part of the veracity class, but if you remember, I like to remind you that Martin Luther didn't like 5 different New Testament works. He thought they should not be included. Remember, he took, in the Old Testament, he was the first one who wanted to take out the apocryphal works. And he pulled out the Greek works, or the works he thought were Greek, that the Council of Jamnia in 100 AD had decided were not original Hebraic works, Hebrew works. So he pulled out those works in LXX, in the Septuagint, that he imagined were not originally Jewish works, and put them in the apocryphal works. They are not necessarily inter-period. They are works, some of them are inter-period, but most of those are late-date works, most of them in Greek. And remember I told you, the reason the Council of Jamnia didn't like Greek, 100 AD, that's when all the New Testament works were being circulated as Jewish documents. They're Jewish documents. They're Teen Hodos documents. At the same time, now we don't get this because we're not taught this, we don't understand this. At the same time, what other documents were being circulated that were Christian documents or semi-Christian documents? Gnostic. The Gnostic documents, there were a host of Gnostic documents. Even now we see them crop up. You know, the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas. These are all documents from the 1st century. And they're Gnostic documents. And so at the same time you have the circulation of the documents that we've accepted, you have the circulation of these Gnostic documents. And so the Shepherd of Hermes, for example. Anybody read the Shepherd of Hermes? Well, you should, because it was included in the first, you know, there is no canon. There is no canon of the Bible set by Christianity until what time? Anybody have an idea? Until the Reformation. In the Reformation was the first time the canon of the New Testament was, and the Old Testament was set in place by the Christian church, the Catholic Church, and the Lutherans, the Reformers, set them apart. There's reasons, I'm not going to go into huge detail about it. But the big deal that we need to recognize is there are other documents. The Council of Jamnia said any document that wasn't originally Hebrew is not a Tanakh document, an Old Testament document. And Martin Luther said, I agree with that. He separated the Apocrypha. At the same time, there are 5 works in the New Testament documents that he disagreed with. Shepherd of Hermes was not one of them, but it wasn't in the New Testament either. He didn't like Hebrews, James, Jude, 2 Peter, and Revelations. He separated them out and put them at the end, just like he did the Apocrypha. So if you look at Martin Luther's Bible, it has the Apocrypha separated out from the Old Testament, and it has those 5 New Testament works separated out. Did you have a question there?
Just, what about Daniel?
What about Daniel?
Yeah. Wasn't Daniel written wasn't written in Hebrew?
Partially Hebrew and partially Aramaic. So Daniel,
split it?
Not so much. And there's not a huge difference between the 2 different languages.
That's fine. I don't want to get hung up on just this question.
Yeah, the Hebrew scholars considered Aramaic. As a matter of fact, here's the thing you got to get. What was the common language? Okay, the most common language in Jesus' time had to be Greek. The second most common language in the Levant area, and probably Jesus knew it, was Aramaic. He also could read Hebrew, well, in the sense that we say read, right? He knew the mnemonics of, he had memorized the Torah. So he knew the mnemonics of the Torah. If you have memorized it, do you really read it? And do you really speak it? I think you're right. You don't really read or speak. If you've memorized something, the point is you've got it down, right? You understand it, and you use the text or the symbols to help you. But it's not like you need them, right? Because you've got it memorized. And that's something we need to realize too. So, back to the point. The reason that Hebrew has such a problem is that all the translators want to do what with Hebrew? Make it fit with, well, their doctrine and theology. Remember how the word lambano? Lambano means in Greek to take. But it's translated over and over again in the New Testament, in our translations, as receive. And usually lambano, it talks about grabbing, taking salvation, taking salvation. Well, we don't believe in taking salvation, we believe in receiving salvation. So we've fixed our translations so they don't conflict with what we imagine we believe. That's a problem you have in Hebrews. And if you notice, if you go back and look at Hebrews, as you read through it, a lot of stuff that kind of goes, this doesn't really make sense. This isn't fitting together very well. You say, wonder why? Because Hebrews is maybe the most complex work in the New Testament in terms of writing style and Greek. And it uses words in the Greek that are very complex. And so the translation and translators many times wanted to fix. And I'm talking about modern translators as well as the old translators. So we'll see that. We'll look at that. So, first of all, I got some words of the day. As I said, this is pros for the Hebrews. This is H-E-B-R-A-I-O-U-S. And you notice I put it in, there's no caps because in ancient languages there's no caps, right? Either it's all caps called unicals and called diminutives. So many times, depending on the style or the style of the times, there are documents that are in all caps and there are documents that are in all smalls, all diminutives. So usually in that period, they were mostly in diminutives, so not all caps. The words of the day, and I had this one last week, but I fixed it for you anyway. But it's an important word. Theos. Theos is translated as God. Got it. More better. God. This word is very interesting. Palei. Palei is specifically means thrown back. It's not exactly the first word. It's almost the first word in Hebrews. But it comes from, palei comes from palin, and I think I give it to you there, which comes from palei, which comes from balo. And I think it's really important to note, okay, palei means to throw back, usually in terms of time, to throw back in time, for example. Palen means an oscillatory repetition. Palei means to wrestle. To wrestle. And balo means to throw. So this means to throw. This means to throw. This means to wrestle. This means an oscillatory, wrestling, oscillatory fight, where you're kind of vying for position until you finally get the guy down, right? And pale means to throw back in time. This is how the word has... Now, but the thing I want you to see about this is what is important about balo. Well, what am I?
Like a spear?
Well, terra balo. And hyper balo. And dia balo. In general, in Greek thought, this word doesn't just mean to throw. It also connotes the ideas, an idea. So a parabolo literally is a logos, a logos with one telos. Literally, because a parabolo in Greek thought is to throw. They have a single axis, and so it intersects an axis at one point, where a hyperbolo touches the axis at multiple points, and a diabolo doesn't touch the axis. Is an equation, a geometric equation. How they get, look, I don't know, I'm just trying to give it to you in an algebraic geometric sense, right? We understand algebra, they didn't. How they did this, I have no idea. You'll have to ask them at some point. But it's a very complicated thing. If you figure it out, please draw me pictures. It's got to be pictures, right? Because that's what they did. But in any case, the word balo comes from the word of ideas, or from the concept of ideas, of parables, hyperbole. A diabolo, of course, is translated Satan, but has nothing to do with Satan. It has to do with having no ideas or no conclusion or no telos to your arguments. So it has everything to do with arguments. So I just want to point this out. This is one of the first words in Hebrews, and we'll see it. What would you gather by that? That the scholar who wrote Hebrews is trying to tell you. Think about it. This word, L-A-L-E-S-A-S, lelises. This is lelo. Lelo. Lelo, look, it's Greek, right? Lelo. So lelo is, I think it's L-A. Anyway, that's the English of the Greek. Lelo is to, as opposed to logos. We'll use Lego. We'll have Lego as a word of the day at some point. A Lego is a logical argument. A lelo is what? Conversation. The most precise way of translating lelo is probably utter, to speak, to express an idea, or to talk. And lelo can be, and generally lelo is characterized in Koine Greek as being a conversation, or usually not a conversation of, like a logos. Okay, if I come up to you and say, hey, the weather is bad today, that's lelo. That's not a logos, right? If I tell you, the clouds are coming across the sky at a very fast rate and it looks like it could rain later, that's approaching the legos, right? That's more of an idea of a Greek legos, because it has a telos kind of connotation, as opposed to an utterance that really doesn't have that much meaning. In any case, let's look at chapter 1. Chapter 1:1. Dig into this thing. In the past. Palei. Uh-oh. We already have a problem. Does this mean in the past? Does it even come close to being in the past? What did our sweet translator do for us?
They translated the translation.
They helped us out by taking a very, very complex word in Greek and turning it into something that sounds so fairy tale-ish. Right? Once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, right? The writer picked this word. Remember, every bit of word costs money, right? Every single word costs big money. These documents aren't cheap. And so when the writer wrote this, how careful was this scholar about picking the words he chose? We saw with Mark. Mark cherry-picked words. He put alliteration. I think Mark was beautiful. It was easy for us to understand and see. The writer of this work, okay, I've titled it myself in my notes, The Revelation to Apollos, or Apollos' Confession, because I think Apollos wrote this document. I think Apollos, you know, Paul was known as a scholar, but if Apollos came from Alexandria, okay, where is the scholarship of the Galil? Or, and we don't know whether Paul was probably part of the Jerusalem school, it's most likely, but he could have been part of the school of the Galil. We don't know. But the school of the Galil and Jerusalem were probably like here. Where would you think that Alexandria would be? Which was older?
Alexandria.
Yeah. How old do you think Alexandria was?
Probably from the time of the dispersion to Babylon. No, or a little after that.
Maybe earlier than that. The big thing that you need to know this is what your Sunday school teacher never told you because they never used these words or explained to you. What characteristic did the Egyptians and the Hebrews and the Scythians, by the way, there are 3 groups in the world that shared this characteristic that they did ritually. The Muslims do it today. Circumcision.
Oh.
So the Egyptians circumcised. So did the Hebrews, so did the Scythians, and so do Muslims today. Therefore, it was very easy in the ancient times for Hebrews and Egyptians to cross back and forth. Because they wouldn't, you know, okay, the biggest problem, okay, I mean, this is like deep history stuff. This is stuff that we should, you know, when you study Western history or study Christian history, this should be like the first things they teach you or tell you. But in the period, what do we know about the period, especially right after Solomon's death and Solomon's kingdom? What did Jeroboam and all those dudes do? The first thing, what did they go and do? They all wanted help from Egypt. Go look in your Old Testament. They went to Egypt because the Egyptians felt a relationship based on the ritual circumcision and what they did, and also because the Hebrews supposedly, or not supposedly, they came out of Egypt, right? And so there were always very strong ties to Egypt. And Egypt also, remember, the Levant is one of the most important areas in the world. The Levant, we seem to forget, maybe we don't, but the Levant is critical because it's a path of movement for caravans. It's a path of movement for transportation. It's a path of movement.
Crossroads.
It's a crossroads.
Commerce.
Europe, Asia, Africa. Yeah.
You have the Red Sea, you have the Med, you have, you know, caravan routes. There's all kinds of stuff there. It used to have all kinds of agriculture. There's problems with that later, but not because of climate change. You know, the people, basically the same thing happened that happened to the hills of Spain when you denuded your, you know, get rid of all your, what happened like in Oklahoma, right? Yeah.
Rid of your forest.
So you had problems. There used to be cedars in Lebanon. Not anymore. But that's the problem. But the Levant is a huge area for control. And so Egypt always, in the Old Testament, you see Egypt constantly, the Hebrews in Egypt trying or working at odds between the northern and the southern kingdoms, and whoever had the help of the Egyptians was going like crazy, right? Go back and look and you'll see it. So what happened though in the Alexandrian period in what, am I got it right, is it 232 or 332? When Alexander the Great was at 300? 332, that's his death, I believe. But in 332, Alexander the Great had taken over what? Egypt, the Phoenician area here, the Levant, and Greece. That was the control he had, and so that was Hellenized. Not much later than that, the late date of LXX. LXX was finally completed in when? About 250 BC. So we see 332. LXX was completed in, well, in Alexandria. About 250 BC, LXX was supposedly completed, or
After the split of the empire, the three.
yeah. Well, the empire split: the Egyptian Empire, no, I don't want to say Scyth, it's not Scythian, it's not Phoenician.
Three Greeks.
Yeah, the Macedonian, Egypt, Macedonia, and Parthian. Yeah, the Parthian. Anyway, go look at my notes. But the big deal is this. So, in that period, then, when the Greeks came over, what was the big problem for the Hebrews and the Egyptians also?
Lost their language.
No, they were circumcised. So part of Greek culture that wasn't part of Egyptian culture, the Egyptians did bathe reasonably, okay? They had water available, and they reasonably bathed. But the Greeks took bathing to the point of Americans. I know they may not have bathed every day, but bathing was huge to the Greeks, and they did it communally. It was a huge thing, the spa thing, right? And so when the Greeks came to the Hebraic nations, and the Greeks took off their togas, their robes, their himmations, then what was the difference? All the males were circumcised that were Egyptians and Hebrews. Now, taking it off ain't hard, but putting it back on is a little bit of a problem. And so during Jonathan's time, one of the huge issues was the priests were uncircumcising themselves, and many of the males in that culture were trying to get themselves uncircumcised for the purpose of hiding, or, hiding their affiliation so they could become Hellenized. Because the Hellenization was powerful and huge. And it affected the Greeks, it affected the Egyptians, it affected the Hebrews to a huge extent. And by the way, the Scythians are Parthians, right? So this cultural experience ain't little. It's not small. It's a huge cultural problem they have. And so we have this Greek kind of thing going on, and yet, we're having this schools, the different schools, and like I said, the schools of Jerusalem, the schools of the Galil, were probably the lower edge schools compared to the schools of Babylon and the schools of Alexandria. So, the writer is telling you, what is the writer telling you about this text by using this word paleia? The word means to throw back. I put in parentheses in time. But the point that's being made here is, what kind of document is this?
It refers to ancient writings.
Historical.
Historical.
How about it's a Lego? How about he's just telling us, I'm not saying he's using coded speech. He's using language that would appeal to the intellectual, that he literally could have said in Greek, and I don't know the words right off the top of my head, but he could have said literally in aeon, in a past aeon, a past era, a past time. He could have said that. But that's not the word he used. He said, thrown back. Thrown back. A word that has a direct connotation to balo, which is a direct connotation to a logos. We don't know if this is a parabola, a parable, or a hyperbole, or a diabolo. I would guess it's not necessarily either of these. It's probably a standard logos. We'll see. But the point is, the writer is giving us an indication right away to what this document is about. The next one says, Pelei, God lay low. God conversed. It doesn't say God gave to the prophets. It doesn't say God whatever, gave in dreams. It says God conversed. It doesn't even say God lay low. If God lay low, the impression would be it comes from Scripture or from other sources, right? Or other people or prophets. But it says God lay low. What does that connote to you?
Intelligence, watching.
Well, that he literally conversed with you.
Does he mean like, Moses and the burning bush, or Moses and hearing God in the Two Commandments and things like that, since he's saying in the past?
Well, he's not really saying in the past. He's saying thrown back. Now, thrown back does have a connotation of time.
This is not something new, it's been there before.
The connotation here, though, is like Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Conversing with God. But the most recent, okay, and here's, I'm going to give you a freebie. The most recent conversation with God was when? When Jesus Christ was here, right? And so he doesn't use the word aeons or at the beginning, right? He says thrown back. He says in a Lego, at the time of a Lego, you could translate it as. God conversed, layload. And it says forefathers, okay, to those who preceded us, not necessarily our forefathers. I didn't give you the word, the translated word, but it doesn't necessarily mean those fathers before us. It means those who preceded us. Through the prophets, and then we have the prophets, at many times, that's not many times, my friends, it's polomeros. Polomeros means many parts. And in various, not ways, in polytropos, in many styles. All right. What has got to be many parts and many styles? The many parts would be Nick. Those are the documents of the Old Testament in LXX. And the styles would be, we got Hebrews, Aramaic, Greek, and Roman, or Latin. The point is, he's not necessarily talking about graphia. He's not talking about scripture per se. He's not talking about writings per se. Because he's including prophets and those who went before. That includes cultures, languages. It includes all the pieces parts. This is what we call in Greek an ethos. He's starting an ethos argument. Ethos argument is an argument that appeals to a reference or to a source, to an authority. But notice how it's used. Not in many times, but in many parts. And not in various ways, but many styles. Now, various ways could be many styles. I'll give you that. But the point is this, it's very interesting how the words are put together. Polomeros and polotropos. In other words, this Greek writer just started with alliteration, polomeros, polotropos, just started the beginning with a very, very interesting complex word, and just started with a declaration about God. And so what I think, and you know, let's pretend like we didn't know this was the letter to the Hebrews. Let's say, I don't know, pick your place, pick where you are, but you're reading this, and you're reading it in Greek, and you're reading it within a context, and the first thing you say is, okay, I like to think this is given to the Alexandrian Hebrews, but the Alexandrian Hebrews, guess who's living with the Alexandrian Hebrews? Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, yeah, Arabs, all the people around. Now in Jerusalem there are those guys too, but guess when they came? Remember? For the festivals, that's right. But in Alexandria they live shoulder to shoulder. They're all there. Because Alexandria is like New York City in the ancient world. Literally like New York City. They even have a big statue. Right? The Statue of Rhodes, which is also a lighthouse, right? Standing out, you know. It's not the exact same type of torch, but, you know, similar idea. So, very interesting words here used here. Very interesting. The other styles and the many parts could also include, I'm going to throw this in, the Mishnah. I'm going to throw in the Mishnah. Now, I'm going to throw out something else that is historically probably important. I'm not sure how it fits within the context of this. But the Mishnah was written down into the Talmud in Jerusalem and in Babylon. But as far as we know, it was not written down in Alexandria. By that, what would you conclude? Okay, the guys, I'll give you a hint. The guys who were really into the Mishnah were the Pharisees, right? The Levites were not. The Levites and the Sadducees were not. The Levites and Sadducees are about the same thing. So the Levites, Sadducees were not into it, but the Pharisees were big time into it. What did they have? I told you this before, I think. What did they have at Alexandria that they also had in Jerusalem? They had a temple. They had a big T temple right here, and they were doing sacrifices. If you're doing sacrifices, it means you have meat, but you have priests, which means you have Levites. You have Levites who are also Sadducees, right? But you don't need Pharisees. The Babylonian school wrote the Mishnah in the Talmud, and the Jerusalem school wrote the Mishnah in the Talmud. Who had I told you that Talmud or the Mishnah is important to? The Pharisees. So that would lead us to conclude, were there a lot of Pharisees in Alexandria? Probably not.
As much of rule followers as they were, they wouldn't have liked that they were sacrificing some other place, right?
Bingo. And what's really interesting is we know, here's the school of Gamaliel, and the school of Gamaliel was a little bit, I'm not going to say equal, but the Essenes and the school of Gamaliel kind of shared a little bit there. The school of Gamaliel was Pharisees. What were the Essenes doing? Huh? They're hiding?
Rabble rousers.
We know they were doing sacrifices too. They had their own temple.
They thought it had gone corrupt in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they're doing their own thing, right?
Because remember, in the Maccabean period, the Maccabees, the Maccabee, okay, the guy, Maccabee, okay, he was supposed to be a Levite. This is what Josephus tells us. We have no reason to not believe this. Also out of Maccabees, 1st, 2nd Maccabees. So remember your Apocrypha. So Maccabees, Judas Maccabees was a Levite, but according to Josephus, he was not an Aaronite. He could not be a priest. But what did the people do with his kids? He had 7 boys, the 7 guys that all croaked. What did the people do for the, we know the last 2 for sure, according to 1st and 2nd Maccabees. But what did they do? They declared them to be priest and king. They were not of the Aaronic priesthood. And so, because that happened, that is why the Essenes broke off. According to the history we have, the best history we have, we believe that the high priest at the time, whose name was Jonathan, took the priests that would go with him and went out to the wilderness to form the Essenes. The Essenes had this real thing about the temple. They were really whacked out about it, okay? And if you look at their writings, especially the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're big time into the temple stuff. The reason is because we don't know if they made a temple or had a temple, but we know they were sacrificing with the high priest to do their sacrificial stuff. They were doing it according to the original calendar. The calendar in Jerusalem had been changed by the Pharisees in agreement with the Sadducees. That's why Jesus had his Passover a day before the official Passover was counted. If you look at the documents, if you look back at the Torah, Jesus had the Passover on Thursday, which is where it should have been. They intentionally moved it to Friday to make it more convenient for people outside of in the diaspora. So, I mean, this is really complicated stuff, isn't it? I mean, this is just the way the world is, okay? We got to know a little bit, and I'll try to remind you. I don't memorize all this. It's just trying to keep you into this loop of stuff. So, it is most likely that the Alexandrians were mostly Levites, and they were doing the sacrifices. Now, do you think they had a high priest?
You're supposed to, aren't you?
Yeah, you have to. We don't know who the high priest was. A lot of that documentation has been lost to us. We may find it someday. You know, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. At some point, someone may open something in Egypt. I mean, they're still finding tombs in Egypt, right? So someday someone may open something and find those documents. You know, the Alexandrian Jewish documents. Unfortunately, the problem with the Alexandrian Jews is what happened to the Alexandrian Jews? They had a similar problem with the Jewish thing, because remember Nero? Nero had a problem with the Jews, and so Nero basically wiped Jerusalem because, well, he was dead by the time, but you know, the siege and destruction of Jerusalem was because Nero saw an opposition to him from the Jewish people. It's doubtful that the Alexandrians or the Babylonians were out of his reach, but the Alexandrians were not out of his reach. And we know that he persecuted, right? Suetonius tells us that he kicked the Christians and the Jews out of Rome because of their mysterion, because he didn't agree with their mysterion, which we'll talk about eventually. The big deal is that Alexandria, being a Jewish stronghold, right, probably faced persecution and had problems, and so they had their own diaspora. There's a huge diaspora around 70 AD with the destruction of the temple. And then another revolt in 125 AD, which was led by, everybody else remembers this, but I can't remember his name. What's that?
Bar Kokhba, I think it was.
Yeah, Bar Kokhba, yeah. There was another revolution about 125 AD that basically, you know, look, fool the Romans once, they're not happy, but they really won't wipe you out. Fool them twice, they really get upset. The third time, what happened to Carthage? They killed everybody and salted the ground, right? I mean, that's what happens. So, fool me once, fool me twice, third time, yeah, that's it. I'm going to take care of the problem. And that's kind of the Roman way throughout history. So, there's a great possibility that the Egyptian Jews about that time, or the Jews in Alexandria at that time, were also forced into diaspora, because a lot of the evidence and information that we have about them kind of disappeared within that scope, and that's true about the whole Jewish world and community. So in any case, this starts, back to the start. Paleah, thrown back in time, God, Lelod, conversed to our predecessors through the prophets in many parts and in many styles. Let's go to 2. It doesn't say these last. It says eschatos. Eschatos, eschatology comes from the word. It means in Greek farthest. Now, you could say that that means latest. Why do you think the Greeks use the word farthest for latest? They're geometrically based. So the farthest extent of a line or time is a farthest, as opposed to in English, we think in time in terms not geometric, but rather late. So you could take that, eschatos, farthest days, he lelod. He has lelod to us by his huios, by his offspring, whom he appointed, he placed as heir, kleronomos, a share by lot, kleronomos, called lot, of all things, pa. Pas, we're going to see this word pas. Pas is everywhere. I haven't explained much about it. It means everything. When you see pas in Greek, it means basically, everything. And through whom he poieo, who made the aeon. All right. So, who just conversed with us lately?
Jesus.
Who is?
Jesus.
Jesus. Okay, Brown, you're an idiot. He says over and over again, the church made up the idea that Jesus was God. Look, the guy in Hebrews, the guy in Mark, everybody is calling Jesus God. I mean, can he read? I guess he didn't look at the Greek of the documents, but it's kind of obvious. When it says that God conversed, and then he goes on to say, in the farthest days, he lelod to us by his huios, by his son, literally by his offspring, whom he placed as heir, a share by lot of all things, through whom he made. So who made the universe?
God.
Yeah, but through what?
Through Jesus.
Through Jesus. This goes back to the thing in John, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and God spoke the Lego. By the way, the word is logos, or Lego, logical argument. I'll go back. This is probably a reminder to everyone, but I love this. In the beginning is Elohim, which is God's. In the beginning, God's, with a singular verb. God's created, singular. So even though this Elohim is God's, it uses a singular verb, right? In the beginning, God's created. The Spirit, the Ruach of God, rested on the waters. So you have the Ruach of God, you have Elohim, the Ruach of God, and God Amar. In Greek, this translates to, in the beginning, Theos, created. The pneuma of God rested on the waters, and God legoed. God legoed. In John we get, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word created the universe, right? Right here we get, in the second verse, through whom he made all the ages. It's basically not the universe, but rather it says aeon, the ages. The implication here is, number one, Jesus was there the whole time, right? Jesus is the offspring of God, which is very interesting. We'll get more into that. I don't know. And the stuff he packs into this is just amazing to me. Anyway, let's see. There is a dual use of ages. And the reason I want to mention that is because when it says the ages, What age are we supposed to be in according to the rabbis, at least the Teen Hodos rabbis? They are in the Messianic age. And so when it says ages, I don't know how the Hebrews block out the ages, whether they do it in specific periods, but you have the age of creation, you have the age of the Old Testament, you know, of the before the flood, you have the page after the flood. In the Hebraic viewpoint, when God created the heavens and the earth and he rested on the seventh day, in their viewpoint, he was still resting until the eighth age. Anyone heard the eighth day of creation? Right? What's the eighth day of creation? Is the eighth age of creation where God begins to work again. And so in the viewpoint of the Jewish rabbis, God rested on the seventh age, and then he began to work again at the Messianic age. And so the Messianic age is the eighth day of creation, which is very interesting. There's eighth day books, and there's, this is kind of an idea that has come out of modern Christianity mixing with Judaism. Let's look at verse 3. The sun is the aphagasma, the off-beam forth of the ray of light. Okay, all right. You know, already we are getting something very important here. What is the first, that first thing that he says when he mentions in various parts or many parts and in many styles, what does that appeal to? Who does that appeal to?
Well, everybody else, saying it's not just for the Jewish people, right?
Yeah, it's appealing to everyone because he says in various parts. I hate to bring this up, and I do have a quote for it, but remember in Timothy where Paul tells Timothy, we translate it to read the scriptures, right? But that's not what he says. He says learn in the Greek to read everything. The Greek viewpoint was there is nothing written down that's not good to read. Okay? Now we would have, in the modern era we've got, look,
Lots of junk.
there's lots of junk, right? But we have advertisements in magazines, right? So the Greek worldview was that anything that was written down was worth reading and had some value, okay?
It's expensive to write it down.
That's right. And
When it's really important, you're not going to.
So, yeah.
right, you're not going to put junk down, even though maybe somebody did. It's expensive to write it down. And that was their viewpoint. See, we don't have that viewpoint, right? We're jaundiced by the fact that we have a gazillion books, which is really cool. I mean, this is a great thing, and it's electronic too, right? So it comes in from every way, and it's video, whatever. So, in the Greek worldview, Paul says everything is worth reading. And so when he says various parts, or many parts in many styles, his implication may be the Tanakh, but the point of it is he is speaking to everyone about this Theos, this God guy who had his son, and he's building up to telling us more about the son, but these people probably have some knowledge about what he's talking about, right? What did he just move into when he says the sun is the aphagasma, which means the off-beam forth of the ray of light? What do you think he just appealed to? Who does that touch?
Hebrews?
Egyptians,
Egyptians, because of their sun.
because they're raw.
I like that. I never even thought of that, but I'll give you that. That's a good one. Ra and Egyptians, if it's to the Alexandrians, right? The Egyptians. Who else? Who is our, not nemesis, but our famous Greek friends? The
Gnostics.
Mysterion, right? The Mysterion. The Mysterion. The Mysterion, remember, when I think of Mysterion, I always think of when Jesus says, don't hide your light under a bushel basket. Because that's what the Mysterion did. They hid their light under a bushel basket and went into their caves, and when it was time for the revelation of light, they would revealed the light. Just like we do at Easter. Woo! We're copying what the Mysterion did because the Mysterion was huge into light symbology. And why this is important, and you know, I didn't draw this connection. I think that's beautiful. The connection to Ra is there, but there's a huge, okay, is there a connection in Greek, in basic Greek, to attribute light to righteousness, goodness, godness, anything?
The sun god, and the sun god, Apollo.
Yeah, but was Apollo good? Was he righteous?
That's for very nice.
No, none of the gods are very righteous. That's probably got with the Greek gods. But no, the Greeks are concrete. You see, here's the trick. If I ask you a euphemistic question about the Greeks, your answer is no, they're not. They're not euphemistic. Light to them, they didn't understand what light was. But to make the leap that light equaled God or Godhood or something else, you have to say that it represents something, right? It represents something that is not necessarily concrete. Now, within a paganistic viewpoint, you could say that the light represents the radiance of the sun, which is a god, right? So you could say it represents a god. But whenever we see light, the trick with light is this. When I have artificial light, what have I done? I've done what to the God's possession?
Tried to copy it.
I stole it. I took it. I stole it. Remember, who was it? Was it Pythagoras? Who was it stole God's light? He was getting pecked at by the, is he Andromeda? No, what Andromeda? It was the guy
Prometheus.
Prometheus stole the light from the gods, stole the fire from gods, basically from Zeus, right? It wasn't from Apollo, because they didn't equate the sun with fire. They equated Zeus with lightning and with fire, pure. So light was stolen from the gods. That's why in the Mysterion, I hide it in a bushel and I reveal it. Because what am I doing? I'm revealing a stolen mystery from the gods. This is really cool stuff. This is the way the Greeks were thinking. Now, the Egyptians, not so much, but I don't mind that, because what does that directly tie us to? If it's Egyptian, if it's talking about an Egyptian concept, it's talking about Alexandria, right? And I would bet you this. Look, we're going to find dual usage throughout this whole thing. You notice how we saw a dual usage with the concept of sun? You will see a dual usage throughout this document. Because this writer is a very intellectual writer. He's not just writing to one. His point is to write to everyone and many. Notice what he says. The sun is the aspagasma, the off-beam forth of the ray of light, which is really a wild word. Let me see, did I write down I should have probably given you this as a word of the day. Let me see, I think I probably have it broken up. It's from a compound of apo, which means off, and agazeo, which means to beam forth, from age, which means a ray of light. So literally, an off beam forth of a ray of light. Wow. You know, already we're seeing some, we didn't find that word in Mark, did we? I mean, this is just one of those kind of words. But in any case, the sun is this beam forth of a ray of light of God's doxa. And I want to remind you, doxa is literally the mental appearance of God. So, doxa was always important to who was it? The Romans. Yeah, the Romans. The Greeks like charis, right? Charis. The Hebrews are into shalom or arena. Who knows about the Aramaics? They're the same as the Hebrews. But the Romans are into doxa. He says, but doxa means literally mental appearance. And the exact representation, literally caricature, the engraving, the copy of his being.
Yeah.
And
Go on.
the word is Hypostasis. It's not necessarily being, the word is hypostasis. You know, I should probably give you all these words as word of the day, but then we never get done, right? Hypostasis. We can almost guess this, right? Hupo means under. Stasis means still, right? It means a foundation. So undersetting. It's not really being. I mean, being, it's okay. I give you that as a translation, but hypostasis, undersetting. So literally it says the sun is the off-beam forth ray of light of God's doxis, his mental appearance. In other words, he has the mind of God. And the exact representation, the engraving, literally the caricature of his foundation.
The Greek is character, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so why do they, it means character, why do I have imprint here? Just curious. I guess it works, but.
Character in Greek means engraving. It means a copy, a direct copy, which is interesting, okay? Because we think of character, the Greeks think of character as that my son or daughter has my copy, right? So in other words, they act and they look like me. Today we wonder if our children are, right?
Where do they come from?
Yeah, exactly. What world do they come from? But it's kind of funny that is the Greek view of character, right? Interesting. The foundation, bearing, bearing, sustaining, okay, thero, bearing, all things, pas, by his force, his miracle. This is interesting. Not logos, not lelo, but rhema. R-H-E-M-A. Rhema. Is rhema. If you remember rhema, I translated utterance. Rhema really means a story. A story.
No, it's
Telling.
more than an utterance.
Yeah, it's more than utterance.
Your story's going forever.
I don't know why. Huh? What?
I said your story's going forever, so that's a lot.
My story's going forever? He only have an hour, so I gotta get him in somehow. So a story. So isn't that interesting? What's interesting about this is, number one, the word, I wish we just translated these words more properly, because the word would lead you to be, okay, is it the word that John, logos? Is it the word LXX, logos? Is it the word lelo, right? But it's rhema. After he had provided a purging, a katharsimos, for mismark, for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty, the greatness, not in Oranos, but Poupselos, on high. What we'll do next week is we will start with here, and we'll move along. I'd like you to capture, I'm trying to get you to capture how complex this work is. This is not a simple work. Hopefully we can gain a great deal of understanding through it and about it as quickly as possible, but it is not an easy work. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week, and we pray, amen.